All right, in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. I expect a few more people to join, but we can cover some of the housekeeping before we get started and begin our welcome to all of you. If this is your first time using Zoom, I want to give a quick introduction to that, but let me introduce myself first. My name is Susie Bloom. I'm the Director of Education with Rivers of Steel, and we'd like to thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very excited to showcase W.A. Young & Sons Machine Shop and Foundry. I am gathering that some of you on this webinar have visited in person, and we hope that after seeing our webinar that you'll come and visit us in person, as we've recently opened Young & Sons for select tours. So it's by ticketed appointment only, but you can find out more information on our website, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on in the webinar. And this is just a great way for us to connect with some of you that are across the state and in Baltimore. So we're very excited to be part 2 of the summer road trip series. It's been a fun project for all of us to work on. It's helped us try to figure out this whole teaching virtually and planning for things on Zoom, which has been a long time coming for some of us, that we're a little bit hesitant on using this kind of software. So it's a great way for us all to connect now, and we hope, like I said, to see you in the future. But if you take a look at the bottom of your screen, or if you tap your screen, you should see some information. So if you're on a regular computer, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you'll see an option for a Q&A box. And throughout the program, you can type questions into the Q&A box. I will be monitoring it. We will provide you with some time after the video about Young & Sons to ask questions, and we will also provide time at the end of the program to ask questions. But if something comes up in between, you can go ahead and type it in that Q&A box. If you accidentally type something in the chat box, we can see that too. So I'll be monitoring both of those. The Q&A box is something that everybody can see though. So feel free to type in that box, and I do believe you have the option to ask a question anonymously or with your name attached. So we'll give you that option. And I'd also like to introduce our other panelists this evening. We have folks joining us from Baltimore Museum of Industry and the National Museum of Industrial History. They are also part of our road trip series. So I'd like to first introduce Deborah Carden from the Baltimore Museum of Industry and let her speak a little bit about the project and BMI.
Thank you so much, Susie. Good evening. We're really grateful to you and our friends at both the Rivers of Steel and the National Museum of Industrial History for partnering with us on this 3-part summer road trip series. I do hope that many of you had a chance to participate in our first stop, which was back in June when we visited the BMI. We had a chance to explore a photography exhibit that we have on view about the workers at the Bethlehem Steel Mill in Baltimore. For those of you who don't know our museum, we are dedicated to telling the story of the workers who built Baltimore into an industrial powerhouse and the many different industries that were once prominent in our city, including canning, clothing manufacturing, transportation, printing, and many, many others. We're located in a former oyster cannery in South Baltimore. We're not too far from the Inner Harbor. But we're also very much dedicated to not just exploring the past, but also connecting our visitors to what is happening in industry today, which of course has taken on new meaning and urgency as COVID-19 has impacted so many facets of work life. Although our museum is still closed, I encourage you to check out our website. You can find our rich virtual offerings, which include tours, recorded lectures, family activities, and we do hope that you'll come visit us when it's safe to do so. And finally, I would just very much like to thank each and every one of you for your membership support of our institutions. Your generosity is what keeps us going, so thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And next up, we're going to hear from Kara Mosinger from the National Museum of Industrial History. And she is going to talk a little bit about her museum, and they are also stop number 3 on their virtual road trip series.
Hi, everybody. I'm the president and CEO of National Museum of Industrial History, located in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Much like BMI's mission that Deborah stated, our mission is really to forge a connection between America's industrial past and the future innovators of tomorrow. We are proud to say that we were the first Smithsonian affiliate. The program had started back in the late 90s. And we have about 23 artifacts on display from the Smithsonian, so the largest collection of Smithsonian artifacts outside of DC. So we're very proud of that fact. The museum itself houses 4 permanent galleries. The Centennial Gallery, which brings us back to Philadelphia, and that's actually where we have a lot of the artifacts from Smithsonian. The second gallery is Iron and Steel, which a lot of our artifacts came directly from the site, from the plant, Bethlehem Steel, where we are located. The third is our silk gallery, which is a little known fact to some people not from the valley, that silk was a huge industry in the valley, and at a certain point they actually employed more women and children than Bethlehem Steel employed men. And our last is a propane exhibit. The stories that we tell with the 4 galleries that we have is talking about how you can start something local and grow it global. So the gentleman who had discovered propane was someone that had lived in the Allentown area, and much the same stories that we have in Iron and Steel, Silk, and Centennial. Things that started in our backyard and grew into something much larger. So we definitely like to share that with the students that come through, and the youth that we're able to explain to them, you know, just right where you're growing up, you may not even know what a rich history you have. I also would like to thank our partners here, Rivers of Steel and Baltimore Museum of Industry. We were talking before the call opened up about how this unfortunate pandemic has actually brought us all closer together to work together and share our shared missions together. So also want to thank the members as well. And if I can take a minute to highlight the third and final stop of our summer road trip series, that is going to be diving deep into our gallery in the museum, the Iron and Steel Gallery. We are fortunate that one of our longtime volunteers, Don Young, was actually a longtime employee of Bethlehem Steel. He worked not only 33 years at the Bethlehem plant, but a total of 56 years at Bethlehem Steel at its successor electric furnace melt department as a foreman. We actually had the fortunate event of going to Steelton with him to visit an operating steel plant, and it was only about, I'd say, a year, 2 years ago, and everybody was still high-fiving Don. They knew him from, so a lot of people know how much of a rich history he has with Bethlehem Steel. So he's an excellent person to be able to give this virtual tour for everybody, and we're hoping you'll all tune into that as well. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you. And we've had a few more people join, and I did neglect to mention at the beginning of the program, we are recording this webinar. We can't see you as an attendee, so don't worry, you're not being recorded. We can't see your camera view, but we will make this webinar available on our YouTube channel once we get everything processed and edited. So if somebody missed it this evening or you'd like to watch it again, we will have it available for you. And next up, I'd like to introduce Augie Carlino, President and CEO of Rivers of Steel, and he's going to talk a little bit about our organization and a little bit about the history of Young & Sons.
Thank you, Susie, and welcome everybody who I can see and who I can't see. We can't see names. I scrolled through the participants list and I do see a lot of familiar names there. Good to see everybody in this virtual existence. And just to re-emphasize what Kara and Deborah said, you know, we're all living in a very strange time with COVID. But there are really good things that have come out of this sometimes, and this being one of them. 2 partners that we have both in Baltimore out in Bethlehem Easton area that we hope to do a whole lot more with after we all get back to normal. So to Kara and Deborah, to all that you work with, thank you for all you do, and everybody, thank you for being here tonight. The picture behind me is probably the place that many of you are so familiar with Rivers of Steel. But we want to introduce you to the W.A. Young and Sons Foundry and Machine Shop, which sits in a little village, hamlet, on the Monongahela River, upstream from Pittsburgh, south of us, heading toward West Virginia. As many of us might know, the Mon flows south to north, and so this is a little town that, like a lot of its houses and buildings, this facility is stuck in time and absolute gem. Carly McCoy, who's going to run a little slide presentation, PowerPoint, on my discussion about a little bit about Rivers of Steel and the machine shop, to give you an idea. And I'm letting her run this slideshow because I was given explicit instructions that I have a very short time period. And if anyone has ever seen me give a presentation, you know that my 10 minutes will oftentimes last quite longer. So Carly is going to move me along with these images. Carly, I'm waiting for you to share the screen. So Rivers of Steel is a national heritage area and a state heritage area designated by Congress in 1996. Yeah, you can go right past that, thank you. And designated by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a state heritage area in that same year in 1996. Our mission statement talks about heritage development as a key resource in community development, where we get communities to come together to share their stories, work to conserve their resources, and use those as building blocks to help community revitalization and create transformative experiences in these old industrial communities. Thank you, Carly, go ahead. This is, this is the history of Pittsburgh for what many people would know or think about. And to a degree, a lot of people think this is what Pittsburgh still looks like. The picture that you see up in the upper right corner where it says Smoky Picture, Pittsburgh, this is actually a postcard that used to be sent around the country and the world promoting the city, but we're not like that anymore. Not by choice necessarily, but by what happened to the economy in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You can go ahead and move on, Karen. What we all saw in our communities in Eastern Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, in Baltimore, was the loss and the collapse of industry. And a lot of factors played reason for that. But here in Southwest Pennsylvania, there was a push to try and save a part of that heritage so that it wouldn't be lost forever and that future generations would understand what Pittsburgh's role was in building the United States and the world. That was not an easy thing to do because when you talk about trying to save the story of a mill, these were all integrated industrial systems, and that mill in Pittsburgh and Baltimore and other places around the country just didn't sit in isolation by itself. It was part of a much broader industrial fabric that stretched across the landscape. The bottom picture shows the contrast in that landscape. That's a small coal patch town in Fayette County in Southwest Pennsylvania. Coal, the fuel to the blast furnaces, because the coal was converted to coke. And that coke was then fed into the blast furnaces in order to build the heat in order to make the steel from the melted iron. That's what heritage areas are all about. Go ahead. They encompass not just a vast array of physical resources, but we're talking about a cultural identity of towns and communities and a region as a whole. And that was what was threatened to be lost, more than just the mills themselves as they were being torn down. What happened in the 70s was literally tearing the gut out of people. Things that they were so familiar with, not only because they worked there, but these were generational places where people knew about them because of their dads, their mothers, their aunts, their uncles, their grandmothers, their grandfathers. Many generations had worked in these mills. And their connection to the mills weren't just measured by how long they worked there, but it was a cumulative total. When they would say, I had 120 years in that mill, they were adding up all the years of all of their ancestors, adding that to their time there. It was a very personal thing for them in the mills and the mines. That all got lost. And the challenge was, how do you save part of that while still allowing for these sites to advance and become redeveloped? That's where Rivers of Steel stepped in, long before it was a National Heritage Area, in working with developers and local governments in trying to save parts of these old industrial sites. At that same time, the state of Pennsylvania, the state of Maryland, the state of New York, other localities, and the federal government were looking at what heritage areas could do to help bring some type of economic stability back to these communities where we celebrate that history and heritage, but allow these places to transform. And this is actually a definition of what a National Heritage Area is, as written by the National Park Service. Today, there are 55 National Heritage Areas across the country. Many of them deal with industrial history, but not all of them. They all are designed to tell a very specific, but not necessarily unique part of the story of the United States as a country and our contributions to the world. This is our footprint in Southwest Pennsylvania, 8 counties, all of which have elements of industrial history connected to that center gray area there that says Big Steel. None of that existed within that Big Steel journey area, as we call it, could have come to be without those industries and the communities on the outlying portion of that area. And all of that was connected by an incredible river transportation system that moved commerce not only through this region, but out to national and world markets. Next slide, please. We right now, Rivers of Steel, we work in all these communities. We've done over the past 30 years, hundreds of projects with communities, but there are a few that we control ourselves, not for any other reason than these were critical resources that stood to be lost, and we stepped in to help work with the communities to bring stewardship to them. This is our headquarters in Homestead, Pennsylvania, the Bose Building. If everybody, and we'll show a picture a little later on, if everybody knows about the great strike and lockout in 1892 at the Homestead Works, this building at that time was in the final days of being constructed, literally painting the walls in order to allow it to be occupied as a hotel and a bar and a restaurant, a saloon. The mill gate was not far away from this, and these buildings were designed as places where workers at the end of the shift would come and get a drink, maybe get a bite to eat. Some of them had a lot of illicit things happening in them. I won't go into that. But why this building is saved today, and you can see the difference in before and after, why this building is saved today by Rivers of Steel and redeveloped is because it was the headquarter for the union during the time of the strike in Homestead in 1892, along with the press that took up headquarters there in order to report the events in 1892. Next one, please. That building is directly connected to the pump house and water tower. This is inside the old U.S. Steel Homestead Works, and this is the site of the battle in 1892. That picture on the upper left, the black and white picture, is showing the strike literally at the time. The building sat there on the precipice overlooking the river, and it was actually a loading area for bringing goods and supplies into the mill as the mill was being constructed as well. It was working and still being built in certain sections at that time. That building became a place where all of the townspeople and the striking workers converged on the riverfront to greet the barge that was being pushed upriver by a tug that had the replacement workers, the Pinkerton guards that were coming in to take over the mill. The major battle ensued. People were shot, some were killed, many were wounded. We all know that history. Today, that site is not only an interpretive area, but it also is a venue for where we can do different types of events. Across the river is the Cary furnaces. Most of the time, mills in these communities sat on opposite sides of the rivers from each other, even though it was still the same steel mill. And that's merely a result of geography for Southwest Pennsylvania. We don't have much flat land here. So industry had to take advantage of the alluvial plain along the river. And for Homestead and the Cary furnaces, the hot side of the mill, that being where the iron was made, is made in a blast furnace complex. And Cary furnaces then would ship that, literally transport that hot molten iron across the river, across a bridge, the hot metal bridge, to the other side of the river where it was made into the different steel products. Today, Cary Furnaces is owned by Allegheny County, but we have a management agreement with them. The site is a National Historic Landmark. By the way, the Bose Building is a National Historic Landmark. This site, we do all kinds of events at. We run tours in a normal environment. In the COVID existence, we're doing drive-in movie theaters there and some tours where we have limited space. But like all these places, if you visit, come see us. When things get back to normal, we can take you on bigger and more involved tours than what we're doing now. Next, please. We'll talk about our star for the evening, the W.A. Young Machine Shop and Foundry, which is in Rice's Landing, as I said, in Greene County, Pennsylvania. As awe-inspiring as Cary Furnaces is to anyone that walks into it for the first time or for the 10th time, this site is absolutely jaw-dropping. And it isn't that impressive necessarily from the outside, although it's remarkable the condition that it is in, given that it's over 100 years old. But what is inside is what's the truly remarkable part of this. This facility is not unlike many other facilities that dotted the landscape in Southwest Pennsylvania. A small family-owned facility whose business was designed around providing service support to the mills, to the mines, to the railroads, to the tug and barge industry, all of which were supplying that big manufacturing. This is a picture of the inside. When this facility closed in the 1960s, it literally was padlocked and walked away from, and nothing has changed in it at all. Next picture. What we discovered when we did discover this in 1991 was it was a community group in the town of Rice's Landing that had grand aspirations for restoring it and making it accessible to the public. But like a lot of those community groups, they lacked capacity. They knew they needed to raise money, but they weren't sure about how to do it. And they thought about things like bake sales. Well, the amount of restoration that needed to go into this place in order to make sure it was preserved for generations was going to require a whole lot more money than a bake sale could ever generate, or hundreds of bake sales could, for that matter. And that's where Rivers of Steel stepped in at the very beginning. We became a partner to this community group to help them find ways to raise money, help them with grants and technical assistance so that they could begin the task slowly of the restoration of this site. Next picture. What became evident to many people is as much as those folks in the community had the desire for the restoration and preservation, as I said, they lacked the capacity. And after a while, the money that was raised, while it was going toward projects, it just wasn't going toward projects that were wisely decided. And the Greene County Commissioners approached us about 2007 and said, look, we fear we're going to lose this facility if Rivers Steel doesn't take a greater role. And that request that day was that if we could take ownership of this site. We agreed to that ownership, but under certain conditions. And those conditions were, one, we would never push the community group or the Greene County Historical Society, who actually owned the facility, away from the partnership table. The second condition was our ownership is temporary. We never defined what temporary is by way of a time frame. But during that period of time that we own it, we are going to work with the community and work with the Greene County Commissioners in order to raise funds to restore it. And I think at last count, we're probably at or close to a million, if not over $1 million in restoration monies that has been raised and put into that site. Next picture. What we do and what we do with the community there and with the Blacksmiths Association that come to that site often, in fact, once a year to do an annual hammer in, is open it up for events. And TJ, who's on the chat or on the video conference today, TJ being our site manager, is working with volunteers down there as they go in pretty much every day in order to do some work in order to help the restoration. We've also got contractors that are going in to do work that is much more precise and labor intensive, but we're also having tours that are being run where we can collect a small fee and put that toward the restoration. They make items that are forged at that site. We sell those. They have an auction once a year, and the facility is just amazing. And that was my cue to move on to Ron.
Okay. Thanks, Augie. All right. So we ready? There we go. There we go. I'm Ron Baroff. I'm Director of Historic Resources and Facilities with Rivers of Steel. Augie did a great job of covering a whole lot of ground there, which we'll kind of jump through some of it. But what I want to talk about a bit tonight is the role of the river, and the Monongahela River in particular. Monongahela, as Augie had mentioned, runs south to north from Fairmont, West Virginia, up to the point in Pittsburgh, where it, along with the Allegheny River, forms the Ohio River and leads to points west. The Mon was, and in many regards still is, the hardest working river in the world. There was more commerce and industry and trade along this river than anywhere else, and gave rise to this notion of Pittsburgh, the industrial city. You know, this great second American industrial revolution that takes place in the mid-19th century through the 20th century. You know, what is really known for more than anything else for most people are the great mills, like the Homestead Works, which employed at its height 15,000 people. And next slide, the Jones and Laughlin Works, which was right downtown, which at its height is employing 14,000 people. But it's really much more than that. You know, all along its riverbanks were coal mines, glass factories, rail, shipping, shipbuilding, which is really the first big industry in this region, that were, you know, endeavors that were bringing people to these river towns and, you know, creating this growth of industry along the river. That by the mid-19th century, you can pop through a couple of slides, Carly, thank you. Along with coal mining, go to the next one, please. There we go. So that by the mid-19th century, you have, you know, hundreds of facilities along the rivers, from, Greene County all the way up through the city of Pittsburgh and beyond that are employing thousands of people. Anywhere from small foundries like the machine shop, which employed no more than a handful of folks, to those massive mills that we see along the river later on. Go to the next one, please. What ends up happening in the mid 1850s is that the Army Corps of Engineers builds number 6 lock in Rice's Landing, which gives rise to that town. You now have a major lock and dam there, so that commerce is built around it, the town is built around it. That by the 1870s, 1880s, you have these small towns dotting the river. Go to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. We're jumping all around. All right. So, a lot of boat traffic, a lot of barge traffic, and this lock is open until 1865. But what it really does for Greene County is give rise to facilities like W.A. Young, where they are in direct response to the boats coming in, the coal mines in the early part of the 20th century, supplying materials and forging what they need to do, casting what they need to do, and machining what they need. So originally serving the packet boat industry into the coal mining industry. And as those things start to recede and more starts to take place in and around the city of Pittsburgh, these larger mills start to dominate, they adapt and start making more piecework, working with local folks to do repairs, creating a hardware store within the facility, doing auto repairs, things like that to survive. And they managed to survive until the 1960s, when the second generation of the family retires. And it's at that point that the shop closes up and moves into private hands, and eventually, as Augie talked about, to the Greene County Historical Society. But it's a fabulous place. It's overhead line shaft, belt-driven machinery facility that is really stepping back in time. You walk in, everything runs as it used to. And Augie can attest this. When we first took over the site, it's amazing. You open drawers and every receipt was there. Pencils that the guys chewed on were still there. It was the epitome of they went to lunch and never came back, really standing still in time. And it's a fabulous lesson in what these shops were like, these small family-run piece shops that spotted the landscape at one time, but now no longer exist. Go to the next slide. All right, so now it's time to actually run a little video and take a tour of the site with George Blystone, or Bly as we all call him, who is our caretaker for the site and knows the facility better than anyone I know. Thank you.
I'm George Blystone. Welcome to the W.A. Young & Sons Foundry and Machine Shop located on the Mon River. The shop used to service paddle wheeler steamboats for the coal mines and other coal-related industries. The machine shop is run by a gasoline engine. It was run by steam. The overhead belt-driven machines all still operate approximately the same way that they did when it was built. Lathes and stuff that made shafts. This is an arbor press which they made here. This is the wooden pattern to make a sand casting of that piece. This, like I said, this lathe has a 20-foot bed. We have a gear chucked up in it now. This is the gasoline power plant we have now to run the overhead belt-driven machines. I'm going to start the engine that runs the belt line. Milling machine. It has a clutch that operates it, and that gets it spinning. It shaves metal with cutters. Radial arm drill press. What it means by radial arm is it means that it can swivel and go to a lot of different positions. The on and off switch used to be way back there, that knob, and now they've moved it up to where it's a little closer to their work. So that starts the machine. This raises and lowers the head. You can see that moving possibly. That's about a ton hanging out there. There's the bit. It's an automatic feed up here. This is 1870s. Pipe cutter, pipe threader, which it was mingling in with the rest of the machines. If you had a 20-foot joint of pipe, you couldn't do anything with it. In other words, you had to be able to stretch it from one door to the other one to cut it in half. Okay. The operation is the same belt. I'm on an idler pulley. This is the on and off switch. Okay, if you could look up there I'm going to move that belt to a power pulley, and then that turns. There's a universal joint up there, and that's what turns this belt. And it still cuts pipe and threads pipe just like it did. There's an arc welding machine that's 1921 that was belt driven also. We think it pretty well will run. This was a press for pressing bearings and things. This is a wooden pattern that was this part of the machine here, and they must have broken it, and I had to make new parts. This is a casting of the same piece, but it has not been machined. They made these stoves here. This is the door pattern. This is a wooden pattern that was used to make the door. We have the rest of the patterns upstairs. This is Gary Shriver, our blacksmith. Forge and stuff were all added in 1908 to do blacksmith work. All the tools and stuff you see here were left here. In 1900, when W.A. Young built the shop and built the pattern shop, he built the patterns and they shipped the patterns to Pittsburgh and had them cast. Okay, then he decided that it would be a lot easier and cheaper to do it in-house, so he built the Foundry. This is the cupola behind me, which was the furnace that melted cast iron, and the floor that you're standing on, or I'm standing on, is casting sand. They actually dug out pieces of the floor and would put patterns in it and pour them right here. These are wooden patterns for coal grates for paddle wheelers, steamboats. Okay, each paddle wheeler would have had a set of these in their boiler, and the coal would be thrown on top of it, and that's where it would burn. These would burn out very easily. because of the cast iron. And so they would bring their boat in. Of course, they'd call ahead, and they'd have these ready, and they'd pull the old ones out and put these new ones in and be on their way. So, and they'd remelt the old ones and recycle them. So there's this one here is from the Snyder paddle wheeler, which was part of Crucible Steel, and the actual boat is still in existence. Welcome to the pattern shop of the W.A. Young & Sons machine shop. This was built in 1900 also, and it's where they made all the patterns. These machines here are also overhead belt driven. Now, the patterns, some of them you can recognize. This is called a frog. This is a switch for a locomotive, for a train to move from track to track. Okay. And then we have coal mine size, okay, which were the same thing but smaller, okay, and they made a lot of these here. We have sash weights. The old windows used to have weights on each side of them to help to counterbalance the window. And and of course they use counterbalancing stuff for a lot of different things, but especially sash weight. Coal car wheel. Okay, I don't know whether you can see the patent date and so forth in there. This was from a company that made the coal cars, and they sent this wheel. Of course, they put their name and stuff to continue advertising. They sent this wheel so we could make wheels here for their coal cars without sending them to wherever it was they had to go. A lot of this stuff, the gears and things, are from paddle wheelers. We don't know what the inside of a paddle wheeler engine house would have looked like. I'd like to find out, but that's another story. This is a mighty fine piece of craftsmanship. This has all been carved. I often ask people what it is, and they take guesses. This is a cast iron stair tread that would go on a set of steps in a factory or somewhere, you know. They also made steam engines. This is half of a piston for a steam engine, and the rod. This is all intricate stuff, you know. This had to be machined afterwards, but it had to be pretty close to what it was supposed to be before that. Industrial stuff. This is a floor drain for a factory somewhere. Yep. So they just made just about anything you could imagine here. Table saw and jointer, which had blades here. They could use it for like a planer also. This was the power for downstairs. In other words, they would bring the power from the engine up by loosening that nut and tightening that bolt, and that would have tightened the belt, and you would have been able to run the pulleys up here. So this was the office and hardware store. Okay, in other words, their clerk worked up here, the money was brought up here, invoices were done here, all that kind of filing stuff. But also, it was the hardware store. And all the hardware is still here, which is really neat. You know, those are 1/4-inch square nuts. But they made all these bolts. They made everything. You know, it wasn't just that they went and had somebody bring it in, you know, because there wasn't anybody to bring it in. All this stuff is stuff, like I said, that was left here. They made some of this stuff. This casting piece here was made here. This is for a pitcher pump to draw water, okay? And they would have cast that part. Now the leather, they would have got the leathers because I actually have a container that still has the leather in it, you know, which is just fabulous stuff. So yeah, they would have. They made keys here. This is a key cutting machine. I believe it's Yale. These are wrenches for lathes and things. These were cast downstairs. You know. Yep. Potbelly stove stuff. You know, that's a little grate. This is a little cover. You know, they would have cast those here. Just, you know, just anything. They cast, they did a lot of pipe fittings. They were able to cast them here and thread them and the whole 10 yards, you know. We're into World War II period. The men went off to war and the women came from Pittsburgh to work. They were apprentices, a lot of them, that knew how to work steel and came here to work while the men went to war. This box behind me was the women's restroom that they built especially for the women that came to work here, which I think is kind of a nice, you know, gesture. You know, it continued on with women here. I don't think it ever really ended. The other stuff that happened at the machine shop, they worked on automobiles. They sold gasoline here in 5-gallon cans. They had a grease pit, which is right in this area. They would have changed oil. They might have opened your transmission up and made a new gear for you. They did just all kinds of intricate things to automobiles because it was the only place in town, and so they were able to do that. We have some auto parts and stuff over here. They just did about anything. This is true made in America. This whole place, there's nothing that you can't find that was made in America. And it was a very powerful thing at one time until, unfortunately, the steel mills left us and it turned into other things. But this was real made in America stuff.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the sneak peek video of W.A. Young and Sons. I do want to allow a little bit of time for questions before we move on with the presentation. And I also wanted to thank Bly and Gary again for being part of the video and helping to lead that tour for us. And there is a suggestion in the chat box that we should get Bly a hard hat and some steel-toed boots to thank him for his work down at Young and Sons on the video. But we do have one question that has rolled in, and if you'd also like to ask a question, again, at the bottom of your screen, if you are using a laptop, if you hover over the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A box. You can type a question in that space, or if you're using a cell phone, you should see an option for Q&A on your phone. You can type a question there. But the first question is if the belts are original at the shop.
All right, I'll take that. We have been methodically changing them over. There's been a number of them replaced. These are old leather belts that give way. And for us to be able to run the machinery, even at slow speeds, we need to replace them. It just to keep things safe and to be historically accurate. We're making sure we're doing it correctly with leather belting. But a lot of it's been replaced.
And during the regular tours, there's another question if the belts or the machines are turned on for regular tours.
I'll take that one. Yes, a part of all the tours, you get to experience the entire shop. So we do start up the motor and show particular machines that can operate and show you their capabilities. We have most of the machines in operation, so we can demonstrate pretty much any one of them.
And one of the other questions Ron has answered, but the material that the belts are made out of, they are made out of leather. So you can imagine how those wear over time. And we do have a question too. How are the wooden patterns actually used to create metal objects?
I could take that one as well. So the wooden patterns are designed to be put into what they call casting sand. And the casting sand basically creates a mold around the wooden patterns. And from there, once the casting sand is hardened, they would take the wooden pattern out and they would allow a hole in there for the molten iron or aluminum or bronze, whatever you are casting, to be poured in there to make the shape of the form out of whatever metal material you would like to use.
Okay. And the next question, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, and larger patterns would be done, as Bly had mentioned, in the floor. Smaller ones are done in flasks and coping boxes. Larger ones would have been done in the floor.
And then the next question is if we have any events planned this year at the machine shop.
As far as events for this year, I don't believe so for the rest of this year due to the COVID-19 situation. We are looking into some events next year that we will be touching base on probably in the beginning of next year. There is an annual event every year. It's been going on at the machine shop for over 30 years called the Hammer-In, and that is where local blacksmith associations from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio come in and perform demonstrating their skills at blacksmithing. During that event, they also have an auction where these blacksmiths donate items that they have created to raise money for the associations and for the machine shop.
Okay, thank you. And then another question about the belts, where we would get replacement belts.
There's actually not many places. There are a few specialty shops that we do order from. However, it's, and if Bly's out there, he's probably going to kill me because I'll butcher the name. I believe it is McMaster's is where we order most of them from. It's, you know, it's not like you can go down to the hardware store and buy these.
And next question, the Pittsburgh mills had their own machine shops, and I believe that's referencing steel mills.
Yes. Yeah. And again, you know, they were the variety of sizes. you know, what makes W.A. Young so special is it was a family-run shop and a piece shop, which there were a number of those dotted around. But the larger mills, they handled as much in-house as they could.
And we have a request, if it's possible, to show the multi-county map again and talk a little bit about what happened in the various counties, which each had a different descriptor. So I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. If Mary Ellen, if you want to add to that.
I know what they mean.
Okay.
By that. I don't know how easy it would be, Carly, to get that back up. But thank you. There you are. So when Rivers of Steel was created, one of the things that you have to do is come up with a statement of significance and develop historic interpretive themes in order to tell a story. And as I said, we knew that the story of the mills weren't in isolation of each other, but they were a part of a much larger industrial system, a complex of mills, mines, rail yards, coking facilities, glass shops, all of which contributed to this industrial heartland in Southwest Pennsylvania. Big Steel is the heart of that, and we call that area in the middle the Big Steel Journey, so that if you're there with us taking a tour, you are on a metaphorical journey looking at those mills that were a part of what was literally called Big Steel back then. U.S. Steel, Jones and Laughlin, and all these other, not just size and scale, but big in the sense of corporate conglomerate operations. In order for those places to operate, they had a reliance, a dependency on fuel, on transportation, on labor, and they also spun out other industries that came out of the technological and engineering advancements of the steel industry. So let's look at the one called Mountains of Fire. Andrew Carnegie, that controlled Big Steel, had a very close business relationship with another tycoon, industry tycoon from then, called Henry Clay Frick. And H.C. Frick was in control basically of all the coal mines and the coking facilities in Westmoreland and Fayette County. We call that area Mountains of Fire because these coking facilities were literally dug into the sides of hills and the mountains there. And many of the residents, when we were doing community meetings there as part of the organization for Rivers of Steel, many of the residents in oral histories would talk about the mountains and the hills looking like they were on fire when those beehive coke ovens were burning the coal to make the coke. That's where that name comes from. So that's a metaphorical journey through that region and all those little towns that have that connection to the industry. That fuel had to get transported to the Big Steel industry. And if you move over to the left, you see Fueling a Revolution. That was where the transportation industry hub technically existed. The small scale, small line railroad companies, the barge facilities, the tug industry, all of that industry was moving that coke and the coal back and forth between facilities and downstream to the Big Steel area so that it would literally fire the blast furnaces within the Big Steel area. To the upper right, the mosaic of industry, this is where you see this transformative nature of the industry that was happening here. You know, Pittsburgh is talked a lot about today as being a new technological city, but you know, 100 years ago, this was the height of technology back then, industrial technology, the engineering advancements that came out of these places to build these mills, and then what they went on to help create across economies around the country and around the world, were all centers of technological advancements that came out of the industry. This mosaic of industry is a representation of it because it gave birth to supporting industries or new industries that came out of the steel industry, glass making, aluminum making, other types of facilities that supported those industries. So all along that Allegheny River and the Kiskiminetas River Valley, you have this mosaic patchwork of smaller scale industries and facilities that all led to their creation from the big steel industry. And then last in the Beaver County area is Thunder of Protest. And while that did have steel mills, the thing that is most significant about Beaver County and the area around a town called Aliquippa was a Supreme Court decision in 1936 that basically gave constitutional rights and protection to workers to organize and form unions within the industry. Up to that point, it was technically illegal, and workers not only lost their jobs, but were threatened by coal and iron police, and their families were blackballed and blacklisted. So not only could they not work in these mills or mines in Southwest Pennsylvania, but if they traveled to other places around the country, their name would be on a list not to hire. That all changed in '36 with a federal legislation called the Wagner Act, which was put in place in order to help the United States grow out of the Great Depression. And what it did was protected the rights of workers to organize. So that is the story that we tell in those counties.
All right, thank you. Our next question, the shop appears unsafe by today's standards. How is that mitigated for use today?
I'll take that. It's not being run as an open shop anymore. It's a historic site. There's a forging area which is partitioned off from the public. You know, we have fire suppression, we have all of those sort of things. The machinery, even when it's run, is not running as it would have during operation. And we keep people a safe distance away. I mean, even before COVID and social distancing, we were social distancing there just for safety's sake.
Okay. And in general, how old are the various machines in the machine shop?
Take it again. They really run the gambit from mid-19th century through the early part of the 20th century. You know, the Young family were proponents of buying older used machinery because they felt that it was better machinery and more well-made. So there's a lot there really between 1870 and 1900.
All right, and our last question, it's a good segue into introducing TJ Perfeli. He is one of our site supervisors at Young & Sons Machine Shop. So if you reserve a private tour of the machine shop, you might meet TJ in person. And so the next question is, when you tour the shop, is the upstairs available as well to look at the patterns?
Yes, absolutely. The entire facility is open to be seen by the public, every single area. In the video, Bly touch base in each section of the machine shop, but at the same time, there is so much more to see and to experience there. So, and thank you for the introduction. So, the machine shop is open most Sundays from noon to 4 with ticket purchase in advance. We used to offer drop-ins, but due to the COVID situation, we have to limit the amount of people on a tour. We have max capacity at 6 people per tour with myself and the 3 volunteers, Bly, as you saw, Gary, our blacksmith, and Steve, who has a background in being a machinist. So we pretty much have everything covered to understand and to explain the knowledge of the machines. We do offer demonstrations of the machine shop running. Most of the machines, like I mentioned on a question earlier, are capable of running. We do have some of the machines that are much more safer, that we use as demonstrations to mill down some aluminum, or to be able to thread a pipe or anything of that nature. The machines are belt driven, but they're all in a neutral state until we engage them with a pulley system on the ceiling. So not all the machines are running at the same exact time. We have to engage each one, and we do it singularly on the tour to make sure everybody can witness it, but also be safe from the other machines. We also offer Gary doing the blacksmith demonstrating. Again, that is a safe distance for everybody. And like another question earlier that was about events. Like I stated before, for over 30 years, we've had the Hammer In Festival that happens on the third Saturday of April every year. And that is featuring blacksmiths from the Pennsylvania region, the West Virginia region, and Ohio. They come in and they do blacksmithing demonstrations showing their trade and their capabilities, and also get to teach people that are in the blacksmithing on different ways to perfect their craft. We also have a live auction where the blacksmiths donate items to be auctioned off to raise money for the blacksmithing associations and the machine shop itself. And we also have in the past, and we're hoping to do it again in the future. Again, we just opened up for tours about 2 weeks ago due to the COVID situation. We call it hot metal happenings, where we do castings down either inside the foundry side. We do not use the original cupolas that are there. They have been deemed unsafe, and the steel or the iron cupola that was shown on the video hasn't ran since 1938. So we bring in our more modern style for safety reasons, and we do metal pours with aluminum, bronze, and a little bit of iron. And we hope to incorporate that more next year in different events that we host at the machine shop.
Thank you, TJ. And before we move on to hear from Ron again, we had another question come through. The question is, are there some unique machines made on site?
Machines, all the larger machines were purchased and brought in. Some smaller machines, like the arbor press that was described in the video, the wooden pattern was made in the wood shop upstairs. It was brought over to the foundry side, casted, and then machined down to be able to have an arbor press in the machine shop.
That said, that, you know, if they needed to repair a machine, they did it in-house as much as they could. If they could cast a piece and mill a piece, they were going to.
Okay, thank you. And I believe, Ron, you are on again to talk a little bit about the restoration of the machine shop, what we've done over the years.
So we officially, Rivers of Steel officially took possession of the site in 2009, but there was many years of funding assistance before that through the Greene County Historical Society and others, and you know, Augie will probably speak to some of that. However, since we have taken over the site, we have put quite a bit of money in, starting in 2010 with the Save America's Treasures Grant. Look, this is a 120-year-old building that is clapboard with many, many windows and lots of openings that really just was subject to a whole lot of degradation through the years. One of the first things we had to do under the Save America's Treasures Grant was to stabilize the building, to put a new roof on, and to do new gutter system. If you lose the roof, you lose the site. So that work was done in 2010, 2011, and then starting in 2016, we've gone through 3 phases of PHMC Keystone grants, so that's Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission grants, which the original intention, and anybody who has worked on a historic site knows how this goes, the original intention was to start replacing clapboard and windows. However, we discovered that there were still some ongoing issues with the roof that needed to be resolved. There were foundation issues that needed to be resolved. So we reprogrammed that money, did the work, stabilized the foundry, stabilized the foundation. The next phase went in and started working on windows, and there is a light well, which I think is in the next photo. There we go. That it's where the machine shop and the foundry and the blacksmith shop all come together. They built a light well to allow more light into the site and for more ventilation. However, there was a lot of water damage there, and that part of the building became very unstable. So the phase 2 grant with PHMC really focused on that and totally rebuilt all of that. Phase 3 then went into the windows. That was the original intention, windows and clapboard, and most of that is done. There's still about 20 windows that need to be addressed, but the building is airtight for the first time in a generation or two, and is stable. And hopefully, as things start to change in Harrisburg, the grants will open up and we'll be able to get the funding to finish it off. We also have had a lot of private funding come in, which has helped us and helped us match the other grants, Allegheny Foundation, Greene County, et cetera. There's been a number of them. But really, it's an ongoing process. This is, as I said, a 120-year-old building. It's clapboard with wooden floor or dirt floor, and it's a constant effort.
All right, thank you. And Augie, you are on again to talk a little bit about our vision for the future of the site.
Sure. Thank you. A lot of people ask the question, so what happens after we restore it? And there's a lot of opportunity and possibilities with this site. Around us, there's a whole bunch of craft centers, different types of artisan craft centers that we could team up and have been teaming up with. Nearby, there's Touchstone Center for the Arts in Farmington. We do a lot with them on our hot metal happenings, where we go and do pours there, and folks that that take classes there, we have invited over to the machine shop. Just downriver from us, or I should say upriver from us, to go in the right direction, Wheeling, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, and the University of West Virginia there. And we've talked a lot to those folks there about potentially doing some industrial history programming, and also developing with the trades and craft schools in Morgantown or even in Southwest Pennsylvania, different types of trades and craft skills classes that might be able to occur there. This is an old world style craft, blacksmithing. And as much as we're in a modern industry today for pipe fitting, a lot of these skills still need to be learned on some of these old facilities there. So that's some talk about it as well. Actually, the whole town of Rice's Landing, and when I say that, it's really not that large, maybe 100 structures in the whole town. It's going through a transformation itself. There's the Greene County Trail that goes right nearby, the riverfront that can be restored. And they bring up a lot of boats, pleasure crafts there, not only for the Hammer Inn Festival, but for the River Fest days. They're looking at this facility, they being the townsfolk, the Greene County Commissioners, they're looking at this facility as being the heart of what draws people to Rice's Landing in this part of Greene County. So we've not done any real market projections for what the machine shop could be, because we've been so focused on trying to save the building. But at some point in time, it's probably going to be a priority for us to look at how does the facility work once we get to the point where it's restored, and what is the integration into what's in the rest of the town and other communities nearby.
Thank you. And we just have a few minutes at the end, about 10 minutes or so. If there are any additional questions that you would like to ask us, I'll give you a moment.
No questions.
No questions. Oh,
Oh,
here we
there's a
go.
couple.
Yeah. This is a good question. Do any of the young family members still exist?
Ron, you and me.
Actually, I was going to have TJ answer this one, but he seems to be
Okay.
muted.
TJ.
There have been, there are some grandchildren and I assume great-grandchildren at this point that have come by. TJ, there was maybe mention the safe.
Yes. So the great-granddaughter, her name's Carol, and her great-great-grandson, they actually had the original safe to the building, and it was donated back to the machine shop 2 weeks ago, and is now back into its original place there for us to show on tours. And ironically, Carol stopped by on our reopening day down there just to wish us all good luck. So they're still active and still very appreciative of what Rivers of Steel is doing to keeping their family's history alive.
Actually, I think it was the granddaughter too, showed up when we did the dedication for the National Historic Landmark of the site. And I can't recall, TJ or Ron, if she lived here in Western Pennsylvania or she lived in the DC metropolitan area. But she came up to me literally in tears because she grew up in Rice's Landing. She spent time there with her grandfather. And she said, I never realized that what he did would be considered nationally significant. She was just at a loss for words and literally crying. It was pretty fun.
Yeah, you are correct, Augie. That's actually Carol who I was speaking of.
Okay.
I got it mixed up. And she lives down in West Virginia, close to Morgantown.
And our second question, is there a basement to the building?
No, there is not.
No, there's a bit of a crawl space, but unless you're larger than a raccoon, you're not going to fit.
Okay, well, we really sincerely thank you for joining us this evening. We will follow up with all of you with the survey and also a link to the recorded presentation and some more information about us and the partners. So we'll share the links to all the organizations that were involved with the Summer Road Trip series, so you can look at their websites as well. And if there aren't any additional questions, it looks like the Q&A box is quiet. Again, thank you so much for joining us and spending your evening with us. And we hope that you can visit us again in the future and look forward to meeting all of you in person. Thank you.